first noticed it at dinner. A small thing. Something barely worth noticing at first. Just a slight wrongness. Like when you step into a room and forget why you came. Like when you sense someone watching you, even though no one's there. My wife, Anna, sat across from me, her hands neatly folded beside her untouched plate. She was smiling, but her face seemed too still. I frowned, setting my fork down. "You're not eating," I said. Her smile didn't fade. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice soft. That wasn't unusual. Anna had always been a light eater. She'd pick at her food, eat just enough to stay satisfied, then push the plate aside with a quiet laugh and some excuse. "I had a big lunch. I'm just not feeling it today." But this was different. Her plate was untouched, not a single bite taken, and she wasn't even pushing the food around absent-mindedly like she sometimes did. She just sat there, hands still, eyes locked on me, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. And then I realized I couldn't hear her breathing. We had been married for 4 years, not perfect years, but good ones. We met in a coffee shop during a rainstorm, both of us soaked and miserable, both reaching for the last dry napkin on the counter at the exact same moment. She laughed first. I let her have the napkin. She let me buy her a coffee. And the rest, history. Our life together had been simple, but it was ours. Lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and old records playing softly in the background. Late-night movies on the couch, both of us falling asleep halfway through. Road trips where we argued about which songs to add to the playlist. She had always been so alive. Even in the quiet moments, there was an energy to her, a warmth. Now, something was missing. The laugh lines around her eyes that crinkled when she smiled weren't there anymore. Her voice was too smooth, too measured, lacking the usual playfulness, and she never blinked. Dinner felt different. I cleared my throat, pushing the unease aside. "You sure?" I asked. "You barely ate lunch today, either." She tilted her head slightly, her smile never faltering. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was so calm, too calm. Normally, she would have given me some playful excuse, maybe even reached across the table to steal a bite from my plate. Not tonight. Tonight, she just sat there, hands folded neatly, like she was waiting for something. The silence stretched between us. I forced myself to eat, trying to shake off the feeling crawling under my skin. The clink of my fork against the plate echoed too loudly in the quiet room. Anna didn't move, didn't shift, didn't breathe, and I should have noticed then, but I didn't. The feeling didn't go away. Days passed. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things, that I was just tired from work and overthinking everything. But it wasn't just dinner anymore. It was everything. Anna had always been expressive, her face alive with emotion even in the smallest ways. A raised eyebrow when she didn't believe something I said. A soft smile when she caught me watching her. The way she'd roll her eyes when I made some dumb joke that she secretly thought was funny. But now, there was a stillness to her, like she was waiting. The first time I really noticed, it was late at night. Anna was sitting on the couch, a book in her hands, but she wasn't turning the pages. I glanced up from my phone. She was staring at the words, her posture unnaturally stiff, her back perfectly straight against the cushions. The lamp beside her cast long shadows along the walls, stretching her shape into something too elongated, too thin. Something felt wrong. I tried to shake it off. I told myself she was just lost in thought, just zoned out. But then, I noticed something. She wasn't blinking, not once. The thought slithered into my mind like a cold hand curling around my throat. I frowned, watching her closely, waiting for the familiar flicker of eyelids, the brief, unconscious movement everyone makes every few seconds. Nothing. Her eyes stayed wide open, unmoving, locked onto the page like a doll's glass eyes. I checked the time on my phone. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Still nothing. I swallowed hard. Maybe I just hadn't noticed before. Maybe she had blinked and I was just fixated on something meaningless. But then I started watching her more carefully. Over the next few days, I tested it. At first, it was subtle. I'd glance at her over my morning coffee, watching her across the kitchen table as she sipped from her mug. Her eyes stayed open. I'd sit beside her on the couch, pretending to be focused on the TV, but really, I was watching her from the corner of my eye. She never blinked. She didn't even squint. At one point, I even tried to trick her. One night, as we lay in bed, I flicked the lamp off, plunging the room into darkness. A normal person would have closed their eyes, even if just for a second, adjusting, reacting to the shift. But Anna, she just stared at the ceiling, her pupils wide, reflecting the faint glow of the moonlight through the window. I turned over, pretending to sleep, my heart hammering in my chest. She wasn't asleep. She didn't even move. She just lay there, watching. The moment she caught me. The worst moment, the moment that confirmed everything, happened in the living room. Anna was standing by the window looking out into the night. At first I thought she was just admiring the view, but her posture was off, too still, too rigid, like she wasn't watching the neighborhood at all, like she was listening. I sat on the couch pretending to scroll through my phone, my pulse pounding. Then I started counting in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Her eyes didn't flicker. I counted to 30, then 60. Still nothing. The unease was like a cold weight in my stomach. My mouth felt dry. I was staring now, waiting for her to blink, just once. Then she turned suddenly, her head snapping toward me too fast, like she had heard something I hadn't. Her eyes locked onto mine. She had caught me. And then she smiled, not the way she used to, not the warm, familiar smile I had fallen in love with. This one was too wide, too careful, stretching across her face in a way that made my skin crawl, like she was mimicking an expression she had seen before. I forced a chuckle, pretending I hadn't been watching her. "Something interesting out there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Anna didn't answer. She just kept smiling. And in that moment, I knew whatever was sitting across from me, it wasn't Anna anymore. The first time I realized it, I told myself it was just my imagination. The second time, I knew it wasn't. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The faint, rhythmic tapping of bare feet against the hardwood floor, moving slowly back and forth. Almost aimless, I blinked, my vision adjusting to the darkness. The red glow of the alarm clock read 2:47 a.m. I turned over, expecting to see Anna still asleep beside me. But the bed was empty. A wave of unease settled in my stomach. I sat up slowly, straining to listen. The sound continued, pacing, stopping, pacing again. I swallowed hard and slid out of bed, my bare feet cold against the floor. I stepped into the hallway and froze. Anna was standing there, in the dark, motionless. Her back was to me, her long hair hanging over her shoulders, the pale fabric of her nightgown brushing against her ankles. She wasn't moving anymore. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, facing the wall. The moment I spoke, "Anna." My voice felt too loud, even though I had barely whispered. She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. A cold chill crawled up my spine. Something was wrong. "Are you okay?" I tried again. This time, she moved, not turning toward me, not reacting like a person who had just been caught wandering the house in the middle of the night. She simply walked past me, slow, deliberate, her bare feet barely making a sound as she slid back into the bedroom, moving as if she were on strings, like something was pulling her instead of her walking of her own accord. She lay down on the bed, didn't adjust the covers, didn't sigh or shift or tuck her legs beneath her like she always did. She just lay there, eyes closed, her body too still. I stood in the doorway, my pulse hammering. "Anna?" I whispered. No response. I took a shaky step forward. I could see the rise and fall of her chest, but it wasn't right. It wasn't real. The movement was too perfect, too rhythmic, like someone pretending to breathe. The second night I stayed awake. I needed to know if it would happen again, and it did. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the same sound, the same soft footsteps. I lay frozen in bed, my heart pounding, waiting. The steps grew closer. Then they stopped. I turned my head ever so slightly and saw her, standing in the darkened doorway, motionless, watching me. Her face was barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlights outside, her features cast in deep shadows. But her eyes, they weren't blinking. They weren't even moving. She just stood there, for minutes. I forced my breath to stay steady, feigning sleep, and then, with impossible slowness, she stepped backward, disappearing into the hallway. I listened. She didn't go to the bathroom. She didn't go to the kitchen. She just stood there, somewhere in the dark. The third night, I set my phone to record. I needed proof. I placed it on the nightstand, angled toward the bed. Then I waited. And when morning came, I checked the footage. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Then, at 2:47 a.m., Anna sat up. Not gradually, not the way a sleeping person wakes up. It was instant, like something had pulled her upright. Then she turned her head toward me. She just sat there facing me in the dark. For 3 hours, she didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. And then at 6:04 a.m., she laid back down. And when I woke up, she was already watching me. At first, it was just small things. Little oddities I could have explained away. Things I wanted to explain away. The way she never coughed, never sniffled, never even seemed tired. Anna had always been prone to small habits, rubbing her temples when she had a headache, cracking her knuckles when she was stressed, tapping her nails on the table when she was deep in thought. I hadn't seen her do any of those things in days. She didn't yawn in the mornings. She didn't stretch. She didn't fidget when we sat together on the couch. Her movements had become too smooth, too deliberate, as if she was imitating the way a person should move, but getting the details just slightly wrong. It was early morning. The sun was barely creeping over the horizon, filling the house with a dull gray light. I was walking past the bathroom when I saw her. She was standing in front of the mirror, not brushing her hair, not fixing her makeup, just staring. Her expression was blank, too blank, like someone wearing a mask of her face. Her lips were moving. No sound came out, just the silent motion of words I couldn't hear. I stopped in the hallway, my breath caught in my throat. She didn't notice me, didn't react. Her eyes stayed locked on her own reflection, her lips forming silent sentences, faster and faster, as if having a conversation with something I couldn't see. I should have walked away. I should have pretended I never saw it. But something in my chest tightened, a sickening pull of dread, and before I could stop myself, I stepped closer. Something wrong with her eyes. Anna. Her head snapped toward me. Not turned. Snapped. Too fast. Too sudden. like she hadn't been expecting me, like she hadn't realized I was watching. Her eyes were too wide, her pupils dilated, the whites of them stretched too far. Then, she smiled. Not a normal smile. Something else. Something practiced. The corners of her mouth pulled up just a little too high, the skin stretching in a way that didn't look natural. A sick, creeping chill slid down my spine. I forced a laugh, trying to shake the unease crawling down my skin. "You okay?" I asked, my voice too thin. She blinked once, slowly. Then, in a voice that sounded too even, too precise, she said, "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" I hesitated. She was still smiling, still standing too rigidly, as if waiting for me to say something else. But I couldn't. I just nodded and took a step back. Her eyes never left mine. Even as I turned and walked away, I could feel them on me, burning into the back of my head. And when I reached the bedroom, I swore I heard her laughing softly behind the door. I set up a camera in our bedroom, not to spy on her, just to prove to myself I was imagining things. That's what I told myself as I positioned the small device on my nightstand, angled just right to capture both of us in bed. I needed proof. Proof that I was just tired, paranoid, that nothing was actually wrong. That night I climbed into bed next to my wife, my body rigid with unease as she lay beside me. She didn't seem to notice the camera, didn't question it. She just smiled, like she always did. And I swear, before I drifted into uneasy sleep, I heard her whisper something, but I couldn't make out the words. The next morning, as soon as Anna left the house, I locked the bedroom door and sat down in front of my laptop. My hands shook as I clicked the file. The video loaded. At first, it was normal. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. Anna lay still, her back turned toward me. I shifted a few times in my sleep, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then, at 3:12 a.m., everything changed. I watched as she sat up, not gradually, not naturally. Her body jerked upright, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, her spine too straight, her arms limp at her sides. I felt my stomach clench. She didn't adjust, didn't stretch or shift the blankets. She just sat there. Then slowly, she turned her head toward me. She watched me for hours. I felt my breath hitch as I watched her. She didn't blink, not once. Her eyes were wide, her face too still, as if she were frozen in place. She just sat there, watching me, for 3 hours. I dragged the playback bar forward, scanning for any movement. She never moved, not even a twitch, no shifting, no fidgeting. And then I realized something even worse. She wasn't breathing. There was no rise and fall of her chest, no slow exhale of breath in the faint glow of the nightlight. Nothing. I felt ice crawl up my spine. What was I looking at? What the hell was I sleeping next to? At 6:04 a.m., she finally moved, but not normally. She tilted back, slow and stiff, like she was being lowered by an unseen force. Her body hit the mattress without a sound. A few minutes later, I stirred in my sleep, oblivious. And then, seconds before the video ended, Anna's head turned toward the camera, her eyes locked directly onto the lens. She knew. That morning, I couldn't take it anymore. The dread had been building for days, suffocating me, wrapping around my throat like unseen hands. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. Every moment spent in this house with her felt like teetering on the edge of something terrible. I had tried to ignore it, to pretend that maybe I was just imagining things. But after what I saw on that footage, I couldn't pretend anymore. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee from her favorite ceramic mug. At least I assumed it was coffee. I never saw her make it. Never heard the coffee machine beep. Never smelled the rich, bitter aroma that usually filled the house when she brewed a pot. The cup just appeared in her hands. I watched as she brought it to her lips, took a slow sip, and then just held it there, unmoving. The coffee didn't steam. It should have. I swallowed hard. My hands curled into fists beneath the table, fingernails biting into my palms. I had been hesitating for too long. I had to say something. I had to confront her. "Anna," I said, my voice tight. She looked up at me, smiling. That same, perfect, unreadable smile. "You're not sleeping," I said. No reaction. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. "You don't blink." She just watched me, her expression unchanged. The air between us felt thick, pressing against my skin, filling my lungs with something that wasn't air. I stepped closer, pushing down the rising panic clawing at my throat. "You don't even breathe." For the briefest second, something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, not fear, something else, something old. Then, she laughed, the wrong laugh. The sound sent a cold jolt down my spine. It wasn't her laugh. It wasn't human. It was distorted, layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. Too deep, too hollow. A noise that belonged to something that didn't understand how laughter was supposed to sound. Something trying to mimic it. I froze. Then she set down her mug without looking. The movement was too precise, too unnatural. The kind of motion a machine would make, pre-programmed, calculated. And then, in a flat, calm voice, she said it. "I buried your wife 3 days ago." The silence that followed the words hung in the air, heavy and wrong, sinking into my bones like ice water. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Anna, the thing wearing her face, just sat there, watching me, waiting, like it was enjoying this, like it wanted to see how long it would take before I understood, before I broke. And I almost did. Because deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I already knew she wasn't lying. I staggered back, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it throbbing in my ears. The room tilted, the walls suddenly too close, pressing in on me. My legs felt numb, my vision tunneling as cold sweat slicked my skin. This wasn't happening, it couldn't be. Anna was right there, sitting at the table, whole, perfect, smiling, and yet, she wasn't. The smile that wasn't hers. My mouth went dry. I could barely form the words. "No," I whispered. "That's not..." She tilted her head at an unnatural angle, her grin stretching just a little too wide. Like she was waiting for me to catch up. Like she was enjoying this. "You're not my wife," I forced out, my voice shaking. The words felt wrong, heavy, as if just saying them was an admission I'd been denying for too long. Anna didn't blink. Anna didn't sleep. Anna didn't breathe. She just sat there, hands still neatly folded on the table. And then, in a voice as soft as silk, she whispered, "But I wear her face." I staggered back, nausea curling in my stomach. Her face. Her face. The realization crashed into me like ice water. It wasn't hers. Not really. It looked like her. It moved like her. But now that I was really looking, really seeing, I noticed the tiny imperfections. The way her lips never quite matched the words when she spoke. The way her skin stretched too tight across her jaw. The way her hands, those familiar, delicate hands, didn't move like hands at all. Her fingers twitched, the bones inside shifting, the joints clicking too softly, too wetly. Something inside her was wearing my wife's skin like a costume, a grotesque puppet, and it was smiling. I couldn't breathe. I took another step back, and she moved forward. But she didn't stand up. She just slid, like her body wasn't doing the moving. like something underneath her skin was. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You let me in." The walls closed in. The air turned solid, and I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I barely knew how I was even moving. My legs carried me on instinct, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my vision blurred with panic. The air inside the house felt thick, wrong, like it was pressing against my skin, weighing me down. I needed to get out. I needed to get away from her. But as I reached the back door, something pulled me toward the garden. Anna's garden. She had always loved it, spent hours kneeling in the dirt, humming softly to herself as she planted rows of lilies, hydrangeas, and sunflowers. She used to tease me about how she could make anything grow, how the earth seemed to listen to her. But now the garden was wrong. The flowers were wilting, their once bright petals curling inward, their stems blackened. The air smelled damp, sour, rotten, like overturned soil left to fester. And then I saw it, a patch of disturbed earth, a mound of dirt that didn't belong. The grass hadn't grown over it yet. It was fresh, digging into the darkness. My pulse slammed against my skull. I took a shaky step forward, the earth crunching beneath my shoes. A part of me was begging not to move closer, not to look, but my body moved anyway. My hands shook as I knelt down, my fingers hovering above the soil. And then I started digging. The dirt was cold, damp, almost too loose, like something had been buried in a hurry. My fingers claimed handfuls of soil, nails scraping against stone and tangled roots. The scent of rot grew stronger. And then my fingers touched fabric. The dress. I froze. A deep, awful nausea rolled through my stomach. I swallowed hard and pulled at it, dragging it free from the dirt. A dress. It was blue floral, Anna's favorite. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I pulled more fabric. And then a hand. Cold, stiff. The skin was pale, waxy, peeling at the fingertips. The nails were caked with dirt. As if she had been trying to claw her way out, I made a sound. Some awful, strangled mix of a gasp and a sob. My stomach twisted violently. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be possible. I looked down at the grave, at the body I had just unearthed. And then I heard the back door creak open. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. And then that voice, her voice, drifting through the cold night air. "You shouldn't have dug there." I couldn't breathe because the woman standing behind me, the thing that had been living in my house, wasn't my wife. My wife was already dead. The moment I heard the footsteps, I knew I had made a mistake. Slow, deliberate. Each step landing too heavy, too controlled, too inhuman. I didn't move. I couldn't. The grave was still open, the scent of damp earth and decay rising around me like a sickening fog. My hands were filthy, shaking as they hovered over the body, the real Anna, half exhumed from her shallow grave. And then, a voice, soft, calm. "Why did you dig her up?" The thing in the doorway, I froze. Slowly, my breath shuddering, I turned toward the house. And there she was, or the thing that looked like her, standing in the doorway. Her eyes were empty, black voids where warmth should have been, and her smile. It was wider than before, too wide. It stretched across her face like it didn't belong there, the corners of her lips pulling back, revealing too many teeth. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I choked on my breath. My stomach twisted violently. The thing took a step forward. "You weren't supposed to find her," she said, her voice eerily soft, disappointed, almost amused. I ran. My legs finally moved, and I stumbled away from the grave, nearly falling in my desperation. I tore through the yard, heart hammering, vision blurring, dirt still caking my hands. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I sprinted for the car. Behind me, footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Not the steps of a person, but something else. Something dragging itself forward, unnatural, too loud. I refused to look back. I reached the car, yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. My hands fumbled with the lock, shaking so badly I nearly missed it. Click. Locked. For a second, I just sat there, panting, praying, staring out the windshield into the darkness. Silence. Just the stillness of the night, the faint hum of the engine as I forced the key into the ignition. Then, a thud, right against the driver's side window. I screamed. My head snapped to the side, and she was there, standing inches away, grinning. Her face was too close, pressed against the glass, her breath fogging it up. But she wasn't breathing. There was no rise or fall of her chest, no movement of her shoulders, just stillness, waiting, watching. Smiling, a deep, primal terror surged through me. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screamed against the pavement as the car lurched forward, nearly fishtailing as I sped down the driveway. In the rearview mirror, she didn't move, didn't chase me. She just stood there, her bare feet in the dirt, her head tilted slightly, still smiling, still watching. A shudder ran down my spine. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I just kept driving, and I never looked back. I never went back. Not to the house. Not to the grave. Not to her. The police didn't believe me. Of course, they didn't. They found Anna's body, exactly where I had dug it up, exactly where she had been buried for days. But they didn't find her. The thing that wore her face, the thing that spoke in her voice, the thing that had smiled at me from the driveway. She was gone. And that was almost worse, because that meant she could be anywhere. I checked into a motel an hour outside of town. Some rundown place on the highway where the neon sign flickered and the walls smelled like old cigarette smoke. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Not Anna's face. Not the one I had fallen in love with. Not the one I had memorized over years of marriage. But the wrong one. The one with the frozen smile, the too wide mouth, the empty, staring eyes. I kept the TV on all night, volume low, just to have something human in the room with me. But even then, I felt it. The same feeling I had in the house. The same feeling I had in the backyard, kneeling over Anna's real body. The feeling of being watched. I sat up in bed, my pulse hammering. I wasn't alone. It was a feeling so strong it made my skin prickle, my stomach churn. I turned, slow and careful, my breath catching in my throat. The motel room was empty. The door was still locked. The window was shut. But still, the feeling remained. I was gripping the sheets so hard my knuckles ached. Then, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow over my trembling hands. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. A new message. No number, no contact name. Just 3 words. Come back home. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring, my breath caught in my chest. Then, a sound, a faint, distant tapping. I turned toward the window. The curtains were closed, but behind them, a shadow, still, motionless, waiting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The tapping came again, soft, patient. She had found me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Click the bell icon so you never miss any new content. Stay tuned for more creepy stories coming soon. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the dark, subscribe for more. Because the best horror isn't what you hear, it's what follows when the story is over.